You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Good morning, 602 Club. I'm sorry, I just had to. As we're recording this episode of the 602 Club, it doesn't normally happen in the morning, but because of crazy holiday schedules, that's when we could get to this episode, so we could get you the final episode of 2022, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as she is every single week, Na'vi warrior, Christy Morris.
Hello, and thank you so much. Lovely to be back and to talk about, my fellow Reef people.
Oh,
I feel like I should have a little more interesting name with some clicks in it or something.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, you're looking very green today. Oh,
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Kermit the Frog would be, really excited.
Because it's not easy being green.
It's so true. It's so true. But now I think it is because we've got more green people. But before we dive into everything, we just want to thank everybody who has listened over the years. We really appreciate all of the support. And we're just really excited. This year we're bringing to a close, but we already have a great lineup coming up for you in 2023. Also, if you would like to help out our show, we would really appreciate you doing a few things for us. One, we'd love your follow on social media. We've got at the 602 Club on Twitter, and then, of course, we're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We'd love to talk with you and interact with you over there. It's a lot of fun. We try to keep it interesting with news going on in the business. Of course, we like doing polls and everything. We've actually got a poll out right now as we're recording, talking about The Way of Water and what you thought of it, all those type of things. So yeah, please do that. You can also help us out by sharing the show with friends. Tell people about the 602 Club. Word of mouth is one of the best ways to grow a podcast, and that also works on social media. So please share our episodes on social media or just follow us there and interact with us. That definitely helps. And then if you really like the show and you're listening to this somewhere where you get podcasts, wherever that is, please just subscribe, and that way you'll get the podcast episodes as soon as they drop. And we would love the gift of a review from you over on Apple Podcasts. And so go over there, give us a review, give us a rating, and then we'll read that out on the show. We really appreciate everybody who has already done that, but it's still one of the best ways, absolute best ways, after, I've been podcasting since 2012, and it's still one of the best ways to grow a podcast is podcast reviews. And last but not least, of course, you can find us all over the place, like Trek.fm. You can see all of the shows we're doing. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can also join the Babel Conference, which is a place to talk to listeners from all over the world about all of the shows that are happening here on the network. And we'd love for you to do that and interact with you there. And you can also go to our contact section on the website and send us an email if you like. Last but not least, Christy and I have been talking about this a lot because we're really excited. We're going to be diving in to Patreon a little bit more and giving back more to you guys. And so one of the things we're going to do here at the end of the year is we're going to be recording a end of year review. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this year, not just movies, but we'll be talking, I'm sure, television, maybe books, music. I mean, it's going to be free ranging. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a completely different format than we do here. It's going to be a lot more laid back. I think everybody's going to enjoy it. And we're going to keep doing that throughout the year, coming up in 2023. So you're going to get bonus content you can't get anywhere else other than Patreon. So you'll want to join patreon.com/TrekFM. You can become part of our team, and you can get that bonus content. And you can also make sure that this content keeps coming to you each and every week. So, of course, Christy, we are back to Pandora, and we just recently got an opportunity to see the original Avatar, and we talked about it this year as they had re-released it to get everybody ready for coming back to Pandora in the first place. And so it's been 13 years, though, since the movie had been out, and I am kind of wondering, were you excited about the possibilities of going back to Pandora? Did you feel like after the first movie that you were wanting a sequel? And was it one of those things where you thought, oh, maybe a sequel would be great, but, after 13 years, you're like, oh, we're doing this again? So I'm just kind of wondering where you were coming into this.
Yeah, I was definitely of the viewpoint of I didn't feel that we needed a sequel. Which I think is kind of a strength for a movie if it can be completely contained into one story and doesn't just leave itself open and some things too much unanswered. I think it's a good thing when they're able to contain it into one film. But I think here they do surprise me a little bit with although it's been so long since the first film came out, I wasn't initially super excited about another one or thought that it needed one. Being surprised at the way it felt new again. It was nice either way to get to go back to the world. I will say, like I said last time, Flight of Passage is one of my favorite rides at Animal Kingdom or at Disney World, period. So I do already like the world, but I was definitely interested to see where the story would go and if it would go somewhere different.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways you pretty much summed up how I felt.
Okay.
I mean, I think everybody knows if you listen to our episode, the movie, it was a visual feast, but I think it was a narrative desert. It wasn't, there wasn't really anything there that I felt like was breaking ground when it came to storytelling, and, visuals can only get you so far. And I think, especially for the original Avatar, having got the chance to revisit it in the theater in IMAX 3D, it confirmed for me that, yeah, I mean, I might have never seen it at home, but that was the right choice. The movie is meant to be seen on a massive screen and with, the 3D immersion, and you just can't recreate that at home unless for some reason, you're independently wealthy and have your own IMAX screen at your house. This is just not gonna, it's just not gonna be the same. So coming into this, I would say I was very skeptical about the idea that this would be better or that I would really enjoy it. But I'm going into it willing to surprise me. I'm willing for it to prove me wrong. I feel that way pretty much about every movie I see in the theater. I'm always open to saying, yeah, I was wrong. So I'm going to be really fascinated through our conversation to see where we both end up throughout that. But so one of the things that the film does is that as time goes by, and it did for all of us, it also has on Pandora, and we are legitimately a little over a decade since, Jake and Navi had helped kick off the humans from the planet. And now he and Kiri have a family. And of course, humans are back. Because they weren't going to stay away. If this was going to continue to be a series, we have to have, I think, some kind of villain. We have to have some kind of antagonism for our characters. And so coming back, there's a lot of things that have changed. Obviously, they have a family. We find out that Earth is dying, that humans now want to make Pandora basically home. And they're also hunting the Tolkien's, they're not Tolkien's, but the Tulkins.
I think it's the Tulkun.
Tulkun, yes, there you go. The Tulkun. I like Tolkien's, though. Tulkun, which are basically whales, and they're harvesting their brain enzymes that are anti-aging remedies for humans. They basically, they say in the movie, they stop aging just in its tracks, which is kind of incredible. So I guess coming back, what were some of the things that, what stood out to you about the way things have changed? I guess the new reason that humans are kind of now here at Pandora, apparently we no longer need unobtainium. They don't even, I can't even remember if they really even give this a name that we get from the Tulkuns, but did this feel like, we were talking about, is this a legitimate reason to be back here on Pandora?
I think overall that reason made sense to me. I think in general in society, in real life, we talk about all the time needing to preserve our resources and, hoping that we're not going to eventually need to move planets. So, let's hope that never becomes a reality for us for real. But here, that is a reasonable thing that they would want to be doing because we're talking about Earth in the most extreme sense in the future. The thing that kind of bothered me was that other than that piece, I felt like there were some things that didn't really make sense. That, for example, the general being back, I felt like that was a little bit of a weak way to wrap up his story when it felt like it was really already done before. They're just bringing him back and retelling the same storyline there with him being the villain again. So I felt like they could have created a new villain and gone a different route with that part of the story than needing to just completely retell the same thing. I mean, other than him being in a different body, it was the same person. So that annoyed me. I felt like, what, do people just not die anymore? We're just always going to bring them back with their memories in a different body. And then also by that point, do you really need to call the movie Avatar anymore if most of the people that we're dealing with now are permanently Na'vi people? They're not actually humans using avatars as much anymore.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought about that. I guess in, with the Colonel and his group, they're not avatars, but they're using, bodies that have been grown, and they've basically been permanently placed in those bodies. And so they're not quite avatars, but they're not quite what we would consider, especially in the first movie, the way that Jake became whole as a Na'vi was through Pandora itself. Being born. Exactly. Give the planet basically giving him the gift of being transformed into his avatar so that he is one and whole. And, these people, it's still a much more scientific process. So
they're clones.
Basically they're clones with, all of the memories up to whatever point those memories have been could be transferred there. So some are more true versions of themselves than others, and so, I think I love the fact that time has passed. I think that's something that was really smart. And I think it's one of the things where, when a lot of time has passed between films, not mentioning that that's happened at all is usually not a great idea. I think of I know a lot of people don't love Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I do, and I also love that the movie acknowledges the fact that time has passed. The characters have gotten older, and so that's something that works here. I also think that it allows for the movie to show how Jake has evolved in his leadership role with the Na'vi, the way him and Neytiri have grown their family the way their family has had an impact just, on the who the Na'vi are and how they act, even where their home is now because the world, their home tree has been destroyed. I think all that stuff was really nice. And so I think all that story stuff really works. I think it's too at the beginning, giving us time to like spend time with them as their family is helpful. So that you care about their kids, which is really important because this is kind of a generational story. Cameron talked about the idea of how something like Godfather series is as much about the Godfather, Marlon Brando, as it is about his son. And so and the family element in this movie is definitely working with that as well. So, I didn't have. We'll definitely talk about the Colonel and his return, for sure, because that's a huge part of this movie. But there were just a couple of things that seemed interesting to me, and I kind of wish that the movie had given us just a little bit more background and detail on this. Because there's a lot going on in the movie. So that's definitely a thing that I think we might come back to as maybe a possible criticism. But why would humanity want to live on Pandora when they can't breathe the air? If humanity can travel the stars at this point, there have to be other planets where the atmosphere is more breathable.
Right, like, couldn't they keep searching till they found the right one?
So I think that's something that really was strange to me. And then it also kind of seems strange that, okay, so unobtainium was the big reason for us being there, and apparently it was, an energy source for humans on Earth that was really powerful and really helpful. But now it's all about stopping aging on a dying planet, which that seems very strange, that would be something that people who are on a dying planet would care about. And again, I wish there had been a little bit more to that because, the idea of finding like the fountain of youth basically in a whale's brain is, interesting. But I'm not sure, it feels like a story point that's thrown out there, but then it's never really expounded upon at all to make sense. My question to you is, does that make sense to you as to why that feels strange to me?
It does make sense to me because I think that they could have at least connected the dots better so that it didn't feel like this was just thrown in for no reason. I kind of made sense with it to myself of, where they mention about babies not being able to endure cryo. Maybe their way of enabling people to travel further to other planets is to stop aging first so that you don't age.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
As fast when you're in cryo or when you get out of cryo, I guess, because cryo is pausing you aging anyway. So that's kind of how I defended it, or that it could be more of just this is thrown in as a commentary about how that matters so much to our society and reality right now. Everything is about stopping aging, at least for women. It's all about, what plastic surgery can you get? What makeup or moisturizer can you use to make your wrinkles disappear and look 20 for the rest of your life? So maybe that's why.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is a good point. The idea that, okay, if we can't, transport children specifically or babies to a new planet, you have to be a certain age to be in cryo. That makes sense. I think it's one of those things where, maybe just a couple more lines would have been really helpful there just to make that, better. Because I think that's a great point, 100%. And I kind of had thought about that. It's just one of those things where the movie doesn't make it explicit enough to really, I think, make sense. And I do think part of that, and I'll probably come back to this a few times, is there's a lot going on in the film. And there's a lot of focuses happening between what's going on with the Colonel, what's going on with the rest of the human colony that they're building there, what's going on with all of the new Na'vi that we meet. It's not just Jake and his family, which that's a lot,
Yeah.
but it's also, what's happening with Kiri, what's happening with Spider, there's just just a lot happening. So, I think one of the beauties of the obviously the Avatar series, and I think one of the most important messages, and to me it's been something that I found that's been built in the series Yellowstone as well, which is this kind of repudiation of this consumeristic nature that we see that humanity has a huge problem with, I think, these days, of really just consuming our planet and people and things instead of living with the land. We abuse it. And, I think one of the things that this movie does a great job of is showing how, the Na'vi live in harmony with their world. They've learned ways to mold it around the natural flow. Again, this is where, you see there was just an episode in this latest season of Yellowstone where they talk about how the land that this massive ranch is on basically looks the same as it did 1,000 years ago. Why? Because, these ranchers, they live with the land. They take care of it. They maintain the forest. They move the cattle through different pastures so they're not overworking pastures. All the things you have to think about to maintain and to live in harmony with the natural flow. And so to me, that was one of the beauties of the movie, is that, we're talking about how it's so much better to live with than to abuse. And to me, I really like that, and I think it's an important thing, and it's definitely something that the series, I think, continues to hit on throughout the second film, and maybe I think this movie does it in a slightly less preachy way than the first movie, because I think it shows more than tells.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think that they do such a good job here of using more visual cues to show you what's going on with that and how the difference between the Na'vi and the humans from Earth use the land that they live on. And that ultimately, if you want your new home to last, unlike what you did with Earth, you have to not overwork the land. That you have to learn how, for example, certain plants work so that you're giving them time to produce more plants before you just overpluck them, or something like basil. I'm thinking of, you can't pluck all the leaves off a basil plant to cook with and then expect it to suddenly sprout more. So that's kind of what I think of it. But yeah, I think we're exactly on the same page with that. I think it's a much more digestible message and not as preachy, and they do definitely show more than tell. Especially the scene where even just the ships that are landing toward the beginning of the film, and it's showing how they're burning down all the forest around them. And it's like, that was just them landing. They haven't even done anything else yet. They couldn't have found a better way to do that, or a better place that was already clear, like a rock. So,
yeah, I think that's an excellent point. The way in which humanity does tend to do things, it's basically shoot now and ask questions later. That's kind of one of our hallmark traits. And our I think too. When this idea of talking about the consumeristic nature of humanity, I think one of the themes that goes along with that, which we see, again, just shown, not told to us, but you can clearly see, is our impatience, our need for things to happen immediately, the new general in charge talks about the idea of how these worker drones that they have can put up a building in 6 days. Everything has to be done now, and which makes sense too when you're coming from a planet that's dying, but you're also not learning any of the lessons from what caused your planet to die in the first place, and you're just repeating the same mistakes. And I think repeating history is a big problem that we see, and that's part of what I think, obviously the Avatar series is trying to get us to be able to comprehend, is that, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And you are asking to just repeat it here on this planet if you don't do something different. And so I think that's, again, two really big, strong thematic elements right here that we're talking about, which is one of the things that makes this, I think, a better movie than the first movie already, just because a lot of these thematic elements are, as you mentioned, we're showing, not telling. And that's what makes for a better film.
And there was another piece that I wanted to add to this. It's just part of the overall story that I thought was really interesting was a friend of mine actually said, and I don't necessarily feel completely this way, but that it almost feels like cultural appropriation, because it's like saying that rather than humanity just coming to the planet themselves, initially they started by stealing bodies of the, trying to look and act like the Na'vi, rather than just work with them and learn from them themselves, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at it. But also I kind of see that in the sense of, this is very similar to talking about colonization of like the Native Americans. And I felt that especially with the scene where you're seeing Spider watch them extract the enzymes from the whale, that he says, so this is all you killed it for, and you just leave the rest and waste it? And that was something that we know from history that Native Americans never did. They used every part of the animal. Especially an animal as big as a whale, if they're going to kill it, they're going to make sure that they're making the most of that, and then also not just leaving a mess. So I felt like that also is a big piece about wastefulness and about living in harmony with the land, is that you're showing it respect also by using things appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's so interesting because you mentioned that whole idea, and what you do see is, when you think of the original Avatar film and the scientists who were there, the reason for them to be in the Avatar bodies is because it did give them the opportunity to actually be able to live as one of the Na'vi and learn from them, and to understand them in a way that you can't if you are just so set apart. And their goal was to learn to live in concert with them, right? To learn to live in harmony with them, the way that the Na'vi lived in harmony with the rest of Pandora. And of course, there is that whole other side of the film, which is that, especially in the first movie, you see that the corporate aspect of like, we're here to basically rape this world of its natural resources for our own personal gain and for our own benefit. And I think that's the difference, and there's I think all of those things are so important, because again, I think it really does come back down to, are you going to abuse the land? Are you going to live with it? And are you just going to consume things, which leads to just death in the end, because once you finish consuming, it's all gone, right? Or are you really going to find a way to find harmony and balance, And so, that's absolutely, I think, a part of all of this, is the way in which, you think of, again, history, repeating history. I think that's a big part of this. So one of the things that I absolutely adored about this film, Christy, and I think the theme that I could not be more surprised in, and I think the best theme in the film is about fatherhood. And, Jake says a few times in the movie, a father protects. It's what gives him meaning. And I feel like it has been forever and a day since a movie has celebrated the goodness of fatherhood and the importance of its role in the life of children, in the life of the family, in the life of community. And I was blown away by how this movie did that, because it didn't do it in a way where, Jake is not a perfect man, and he's not a perfect father, but he's trying. None of the fathers here are perfect, but we see the variations of good fathers to bad fathers, right? And I just love the fact that we were going to celebrate the goodness of fatherhood and its importance. And I thought they did it phenomenally. But again, by just showing us, instead of like giving us a big speech about how important they just show us how important they are.
And that actually came from James Cameron being a father and reflecting on, okay, let's say that Jake does now have children with Neytiri. How is he going to behave differently? I love that Cameron in particular talks about before, when Jake had no ties to any family or person that he was in a relationship with, he was more of a risk taker with his own life and with things around him. He would jump off of the one animal to another, or, go trekking through the forest, maybe a little unsafely jumping from tree to tree. Whereas now he's much more conscious of, I need to make sure that I'm still here to protect my family. So I liked that aspect as well. But I definitely see what you're saying about fatherhood being such a theme throughout this whole movie, and that was a really great new addition to the story that we didn't have in the first movie, because obviously Jake wasn't there yet.
Right. Yeah.
So I do like, too, that they didn't just give him one child, that, they're kind of following in the footsteps of someone who they don't really have a reason to need to limit the number of children they have. And also that maybe if you don't, that's the natural way that things might go, is to have 3 or 4. And then they've also got these adopted children with Kiri and Spider, which I thought was a nice touch as well, of you can have found family just as much as blood-related family.
No, I 100% agree with you. I love that you brought up the idea of the adopted family and how important that is. The idea of being a good adoptive father is really important. A good adopted mother, and how important adoption is in general. And I think one of the things that we see clearly is that I think especially Jake, he is more accepting of Spider, especially as his son, than Neytiri is. For her, there is that species difference, right? She still has that, which, again, with her experience, it makes sense. But Jake doesn't, right? And I think the interesting thing is to see that it is Jake's influence and his portrayal of goodness which makes Spider make the decision he makes at the end, right? To save his own father, which turns out, we find out is the Colonel. And so I think that's really interesting. But I also think one of the things that's, and you can tell that Cameron is a father, because the struggle of every father, every parent, is to allow their child to be who they are and to guide them, but not try to force them to be just like they are.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's obviously something that we see Jake and Kiri struggle with, especially with their second son, is that, oh, we expect you to just be like this, And some children, more than others, will mimic their parents. They will be more like their parents. Other children are going to be the complete opposite of who their parents are. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Right.
And so I think, again, there's a lot of nuance in the film in that way. And again, we do a great job, I think, of showing more than telling the struggle of what it is to raise children and how difficult it is. I have plenty of friends who are parents of teenagers, and working through that in their lives now, watching them try to do that. How do we encourage a child to be the best version of themselves, but also to train them well, to guide them well, help them stay on a path that's going to lead to better things in their life and less harm. So, again, all of that I think is really beautiful. And so fatherhood is a big part of this movie. But I also, think on top of fatherhood, this whole movie is about the importance of family. And I think, again, we don't see that in our world today of people really celebrating the importance of family and how important that is with, in the community. The strength of the Na'vi is their,
I would say, maybe service to each other. Like, they talk about the shame of being useless and how you don't want that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, no, I think that's a good point. That the idea of selflessness. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we've obviously talked a million times on this show about. I also I think the way in which the Na'vi prioritize family. They prioritize the family union. Mother, father, children. Those are people that are looked after. They also, of course, we see them looking after others that are not their own, children-wise, right? Especially with the Sullys. So, but yeah, I think that's absolutely an important thing that this movie is trying to get across with the idea of family and raising children, which is, yeah, we are training our children to help make the world that they live in a better place by being productive members of society, which,
yes,
that's a very countercultural message today.
Right. Yeah, I felt like they showed that so well, especially the scene where they're joining the Reef people for the first time, and trying to be as polite as they can and convince the Reef people to accept them as part of their group. I love that they include that line of, we wouldn't want you to have the shame of being useless. That's something that's so valued to them above everything else, is that everyone has a role to play here and we're all one team and we all want to be useful to the rest of the group.
Yeah. Well, and that, isn't that a really important thing in the sense that you show love to others by being able to be of service, right?
Right.
That it's not just about taking, it's about being able to give back as well. And I think that's an important message in this film. So, no, I definitely agree with you there. On the idea of kind of family and the struggles that we see, I think there is kind of a failure to communicate between generations and between different peoples. I think, we definitely see this with Jake's second son, Lawak, and we talked a little bit about this, but he is not the perfect son, quote unquote, right? He's the one who is different than Jake and kind of has his own way of thinking about things and doing things. Again, it's not necessarily something that's wrong, but he feels more rebellious, but not all of his choices are bad. And some of this, I think, with the way in which he befriends the Tulkhan who had broken the rule of the Tulkhan of pacifism, clearly kind of shows that there are different perspectives that can help lead to better solutions to problems. This movie is clearly showing that, sometimes you have to fight back to defend your home. You have to think about things differently. And I love that idea of part of that just comes from people thinking they know something and that it's only one way, rather than the idea of perspectives. And I guess, we see that with the Reef people's chief, talking to Loak, about why that Tulkhan is, banished, and that there's only one way to view things. And again, it really kind of comes down to that idea of like perspective that we kind of get like with Star Wars, especially.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny, too, how much to me that mimics some things you see in Pocahontas, for example. It's sort of the way that the family of Pocahontas looked at John Smith. They're like, Pocahontas, are you kidding me? You decided to get together with that guy? They're saying to Loak, you decided to bond with that Tulkun, the worst one of them all. It shows that they are kind of rightfully so afraid of adapting, but what they really needed to do was listen and see if maybe there was something they weren't seeing, and some way that they should adapt that would help them, because that Tulkun in particular ended up being the one that really helped them in battle later, because he had experienced that kind of thing before, whereas the other ones had run away. He had stayed and tried to defend the Na'vi that were there. So I thought that was a really interesting way to build on this moment as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, the idea of listening. A lot of times we're not willing to hear what people have to say, and we're not willing to hear any other perspective than our own. And that does not mean that we will immediately, or we will even agree with what we're hearing, but to actually give something a hearing. That's something that this movie, I think, shows. And, one of the things about Avatar itself, the whole idea of I see you, right, is the idea to see who a person is and truly who they are, and to find a way to accept them in that. It doesn't mean that you're not trying to, help people do things wisely, or that's not what it's getting at. But the idea of just to actually see a person, and then part of that is to actually listen to a person,
Yes.
to hear a person, to give them a fair hearing, I think is something that's so important. And so, this movie has that in it, this lack of communication and lack of understanding and lack of hearing, which, I mean, is that not one of the biggest issues in our world?
Right? Always. Failure to communicate.
Yes.
Or to be willing to listen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier being back from the dead, and that the Colonel is back. And you talked a little bit about the struggle of that choice. And so I definitely want to dive into that choice for sure, because obviously it plays the biggest part of this movie. I mean, it's the impetus for, the Sullys having to move to the Reef and learn a new way of life, is because they are being hunted by the Colonel. And so, does it work for you does it, or do you wish that they had found a new villain?
I end up letting it work well enough for me that I, go along with it, because I feel like, how else would you have had as much of a compelling villain for Jake to square off with in the end? But then part of me wonders too if they could have just used Spider in a different way to replace him as the villain. And then at this point have said, Spider is old enough to be taking on his father's role, possibly, or at least be like a second in command, and be the one who needs to fight Jake because he's carrying on the vendetta from his father, the Colonel. That would make sense. Something that's sort of a timeless theme of this saga, is what you would need for it to be big enough for Jake to come up against. But I think that it just feels a little weak that they're just reiterating the same story they did before.
Yeah, I do think that this is probably the biggest struggle for me with the film. The way in which, we do bring the Colonel back. It's also, it's interesting because what we're seeing there, and especially with Spider being his son, who had been left on Pandora and then raised by the Sullys, it's Star Wars-ish, right? Like, the Colonel is Darth Vader in this series. He seems like he's unredeemable and that there's no hope for him to be a better person or to ever choose anything different. And in the end, we see that that's not the case, because when faced with the choice of his own son dying, who he says he has no care for, he relents and then is saved by that own son as well. And even though his son chooses the Na'vi and the Sullys as his family, he won't let his father die. And so there is this connection. And I think that is one of the things that I guess makes the series somewhat interesting, is because are you going to allow you just want this guy to die the whole time because he's just so evil. And yet there is that moment at the end with his son, and it makes you wonder, okay, is this whole thing about working towards the redemption of this character and finding a way to take what you thought was unredeemable and make it redeemable, which is, again, quite a countercultural thing these days. And because we just don't talk enough about the idea of that redemption is possible, and so I don't know. I guess it's somewhat of a mixed bag for me, but at the same time, I find myself fascinated as to what they could do in a future film because of making these choices with him having a son, making these choices with him, choosing to not let that son die, and actually showing that there is some humanity in this character that you didn't think was there. I think legitimately the strangest thing is you do feel like he is just Darth Vader level evil, and yet when faced with the choice that he has, that's not the case. And to me, that's kind of fascinating.
And it makes him a more multi-dimensional character. That's always more interesting than someone who's completely black and white. They're either completely evil or they're completely good. It's like, no, the reality is that most of us are in between. We're all shades of gray, right? So, yeah, I like that they change it in that way, at least, and do show that he gives up Kiri ultimately because he does realize he cares about Spider. And I like what you mentioned as well about Spider learning from Jake from spending all this time with their family about what is right and what is wrong. And that even though he doesn't want to spend his life with the Colonel, he couldn't just let him die. That he knew that that would be wrong. So he saves him even though he ultimately chooses not to be with him. So I do think that now maybe there's another interesting way they can go with the story of them in the future because they left him alive and with this change of heart. And you can tell that it's a tortured relationship, that the Colonel still wants Spider to come with him, even though Spider doesn't want to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, I'm with you in the sense that I do find myself to be, I don't know, torn about the choice of bringing him back. And I felt, I do think that I found myself frustrated, I guess, throughout some of the movie, especially more of the beginning of the movie, because that choice did seem to be what I would consider and call lazy. But as the movie went on, I was surprised in the way in which they were able to make it more interesting. And of course, by the end of the film, I think they definitely chose a path to which made it most interesting by, like you said, I think giving the character dimension. And, you know, if there's anything about the Avatar series, especially with the first movie, is that there was a true lack of dimension. And I think that what we've been given here is we're actually adding dimension to the series overall. And, you know, to do that with, I think, maybe the worst offender of the series when it comes to the lack of dimension is really, it's a good choice. And I think I was surprising because I wasn't expecting this. In all honesty, I don't find Cameron to be a very dimensional character writer. And there are still some struggles that I have with that, I think, in this film. But I think he was able to find some and to be able to add some. And to me, that's pretty awesome. So, I give him props for that. I'm glad that's the case.
There was one minor thing, though, just going back to some things that maybe I would have changed. I do wish, at least with Spider, that they would have figured out something to do about him having a mask, because they just don't really explain how he constantly always has enough air supply on him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's 100% a great point.
Does he have some extras that he keeps at Sully's house? I mean, he doesn't have I guess he does have the lab that he visits often because they've got Kiri's mother's body still in there. But yeah, I don't know. I just felt like that could have been explained a little better. Like, how does he just have this endless supply of air to be living and exploring everywhere all the time with the other Na'vi and be fine and be able to breathe?
Yep, I 100% agree with you in that. And so one of the most interesting, I think, returns that we get is the way in which Grace Augustine's character, who's played by Sigourney Weaver, finds a way to return. I found it completely unexpected in the sense that she doesn't really return, but she has a daughter named Kiri who had apparently been in her avatar body before she died and was born and has been adopted by the Sullys and has a very interesting and very strong connection with Awa. In fact, she might be the most in tune with Awa of anyone that we see in the film. How did that work for you? Because in all honesty, I did not see that coming. I thought Grace was going to be the one character that was very easy to see return, and yet that they don't go that route to bring her back like that. And so I'm fascinated to hear what you thought of that character and that idea.
So it's funny. I certainly did not expect it as well. I think that maybe the introduction of Kiri could have been done a little better. I just feel like we don't still really have a good idea about how she came into existence. Although I will say in general, even though that's a question I'll always have, it's probably better overall that they don't go into how the Na'vi reproduce. Like you and I've talked about before.
Obviously, they can reproduce. It's,
yeah.
Jake and Natiri have a lot of kids, so.
Yeah. But it's like, we only ever see people connect, quote unquote, with their hair or their tail. So,
which they do with all sorts of animals too, which is, anyway, yeah. The less said there, the better.
We're all connected. That's the point. Let's keep it PG.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, really connected there.
Yeah. Super connected. But, I do think that it was cool as a different way to play on the idea of clones or defining what the difference is between being real Na'vi or being, created in some other way. They're really trying to blur that line, I guess. But I did think that the jokes were funny about who the father was. How the kids were like, I don't know, that guy's in every shot in her journal videos.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the most interesting things about this. And I 100% agree with you. So I find the character interesting. I find it well done. I thought that the idea of the way they brought, Sigourney Weaver back to basically play her own daughter, the voice is the same. They've made her sound younger, but she gets to play the character, and just the idea that she had a relationship with somebody that we don't know who it was, but that had given birth to Kiri as a child is fascinating, and the idea that because of her mother's consciousness becoming part of Awa, somehow that leads to Kiri having a much stronger connection with Awa. It's very, again, they're planting the seeds for some very interesting things there. I do find myself to be in the same position with you. Previous criticism that comes back here. I think there's so much going on in the film. There's so many different storylines happening that we maybe don't get enough answers, that I think there could have been more with Kiri that would have been really nice, and I think would have been welcome in the film, just to get a few more answers, to get a little bit better understanding of this whole situation. I did love the way in which, though, Kiri and her connection, and because the Tulkuns also, we hear the scientists, the human scientists, talking about them and how many pathways their brains have, how large they are, and that they are actually more intelligent than humans. They have a huge emotional reservoir. They have a massive amount of spirituality. And I think that's something that's also kind of beautiful here with the way in which Kiri is a reflection of somebody who sees the larger side of life, right? The spiritual side of life. She's able to see that in a way that other people can't. And that is kind of beautiful, especially I feel like the world in which we live is a world which I think you're either somebody who believes in science or you're somebody who believes in faith, and that there's this dichotomy between the two, as if they can't be one and the same. And I just really love the beauty of the way in which Kiri can actually see how those two kind of connect, that they're one and the same, right? And so I do feel like this is just a character that I wanted more explanation on and more answers with, because I found them to be a really beautiful and interesting character. And another place where I think the idea of, we talked about family, she's adopted, and, especially Jake. And I think he does just such a great job of being a father to her. And he does a better job of allowing her to be herself than he does with his sons. Where, her idiosyncrasies, he doesn't immediately try to curb, he tries to understand. And I think that's one of the places where we kind of see him doing a great job of being a good father to her. So yeah, I'm with you. I feel like this was a really interesting character that I think just deserved more answers around. And so, if we do, I think he filmed the second and the third movies back to back. So hopefully with that third movie, then I guess that's coming, at least, that we would get more answers for her as a character, because there still is a bit of a conundrum as to, like, who's the dad, and why exactly does she have this, connection with Awa, and how is that going to play out in the future? What is that going to mean for her, especially since her connection is so strong? It could possibly kill her because we see her have the seizure, so all that. I mean, it's just like there were a lot of questions raised and very few answers with her.
But, I do like something that you brought up that I didn't realize I was thinking before, and that's about how she really does represent the connection between the scientific and the factual and the spiritual, because she has this awe for the mysteries of it that we still cannot fully understand. And that's where science leaves off. And there's that unexplainable essence that, for example, even in real life currently, we can't create life independently. We always end up having to start with something that already exists and mimic that. But still, there's a gap there between the science and the spiritual of not being able to create life on our own. Somehow that happens, and we can't replicate it.
Right. Yeah, we can't create out of nothing.
Right.
We only create with what has already existed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're not God. So no, it's just really interesting to me. And again, this is a place where instead of being frustrated, I just find myself being very interested. And I do wish I think that this is a place where there could have just been more focus, and in the sense of finding a way to rein in some of the storylines. And so we talked a little bit about the idea of, Sully and his family going to live with the Reef people, which it introduces us to a whole new way of life here on Pandora. We're not out of the forest. We're into the ocean. And, of course, this gives us all the incredible underwater sequences that we get. And it gives us new characters. I think probably the biggest standout is probably Kate Winslet, playing Ronal, and she is the wife of the chief. She's also pregnant. She's a pivotal character. She's also the spiritual leader for the Reef people in this village. And this is a place where I also wanted more of her character as well. I loved the fact that she's like this pregnant warrior princess, basically. I thought that was so cool and so empowering to show how important and powerful women are, especially those that are willing to bring life into the world. I thought that was so cool. And then also to hear that she broke Tom Cruise's underwater record by holding her breath for over 7 minutes in a filming sequence was astounding. We know how much work Tom Cruise puts into all of his stunts, which was actually if you went and saw this in IMAX 3D, you got a special preview of one of the big stunts coming up in the new Mission Impossible movie, which was super intense. But yeah, so I'm really interested. I'm fascinated to see where kind of you are with the Reef people and all that we saw with them. Because to me, I mean, this was the movie in the sense of just how beautiful and incredible their way of life is.
When they show how different species have to adapt to their environment in order to survive. And again, in a great way of showing, not telling, by showing how their bodies are so different from the Na'vi of the forest, that the Jake Sully and his family are built very elongated and lean and strong in different ways in order to get from tree to tree and don't need to have bulk and fins and softer colors. They need to blend in with the darker colors of the trees, whereas the Reef people, you can see in every way that they've been designed, they're designed to work best in the water. They have sort of a fin on their tail. They even talk about how they have bigger muscles, but it's like, well, you need stronger muscles for swimming all the time. They show that their skin color is lighter because it matches the color of the water more. And then also, even if you notice the way that their eyes blink is different. They talk about the difference even in Jake Sully and his family being, everyone except Natiri, freaks because they have some human features, because obviously they were born of some of that DNA. So I like that difference as well thrown in there of, it's not just species difference in that sense. There's some even modification going on. So I love that purely for the wildlife aspect of it, of like real life you see all the time. Obviously, monkeys versus fish would be a lot different. So that was really cool. And I love that they then tell us about all of the stuff that Kate Winslet did with this character, because 7 minutes is a long time. And this was free diving, and it was, I believe, the first time she's ever done that much free diving. They had an instructor that had to be there for everyone. And it's not like she's 20 anymore. I mean, I'm not saying she's old, obviously, but like, she's more mature. This is harder as you age. So I was really impressed by that. And I do think that she does a great job of getting across that maturity and leadership of the character. That they were more worried about her embracing them in their culture than they were about the chief.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. She's a few years older than I am, and I can attest to the fact that the older you get, the harder it is to do things, and it's the harder it is to learn things and to really begin to train your body to do those type of things is difficult. And so I 100%, but I'm like you. I think the beauty of seeing the way in which the different sects of Na'vi have adapted to the places in which they live, and then the way their bodies then have adapted to that is very true, and just the way that different human bodies have adapted to living in different places in the world. And so I love that. I thought that was really smart. And again, I know that when they had created this world, that Cameron was very intent on having a lot of scientists be a part of that and helping to explain and explore, okay, what the ecosystem of this planet would be like, and then what that would mean for every creature that was shown. And so absolutely thought about that here with the Reef people. But, I loved being able to see all of the other underwater life and the way that they live their lives. And, the beauty of that I thought was wonderful. And so it was a great addition, obviously, to the series. And of course, beautiful too, that the way in which we saw them kind of begin to teach the Sully family their ways, and being able to, help them adapt their own bodies to, being able to hold their breath longer and being able to ride the different sea creatures and all those kind of things was really beautiful. So I thought it was great. And it's one of the best parts of the movie, which I guess leads me specifically into the production value of the film, which I think is one of the things that we talked about with the first movie. But this movie is one of the most immersive experiences that I've ever had. If you saw the film in IMAX, it's in high frame rate, which means it's 48 frames per second, which I don't always love high frame rate because it has an effect on our brains to smooth out the action to a point where we're not used to it. I think in some places it really worked, and in some places I kind of struggled with the way that the lighting works with that as well. Some of the lighting choices I wasn't a huge fan of, but this is like the first Avatar film. This again sets the bar for what it means to have immersive and impressive CGI that is completely consistent throughout the entire film. And the fact that they worked on an entirely new performance capture system to do what they did underwater. It took them 1.5 years to design that is incredible. So I think that technologically, this might be one of the most impressive films that we've ever seen just on that front.
Yeah, I would say that's still the biggest strength of both films is the work put into the production value, the attention paid to the detail of the animation itself. They said especially in marrying the live action to the computer generated was really a particular focus, which I think you notice here. And I saw it in Real D 3D. And I do recommend seeing it in 3D either way.
Yep.
I think it does add a whole other level to the viewing experience that you don't get on 2D. And I like that they really make it a beautiful world to look at overall. So that, also with the addition of the faster frames per second, that you feel like you're immersed. And especially in the underwater scenes, that is something that is really hard to do. And they did also do filming specifically in New Zealand to be able to work with Weta, which I thought was great because we've seen how well that can help a movie like it has with the Hobbit films. So I think that, or Lord of the Rings films. But
both,
I think, true. So I did really enjoy that part. I didn't notice as much about the lighting aspect. I would say maybe only in the scene where the eclipse is going away, or no, the eclipse is starting and the sun had just died. I think that was the only scene where I kind of noticed the lighting looking weird, but maybe it was also just intentional to show that it's suddenly like nighttime because of the eclipse. Anyway, overall, I think it looks visually stunning, and that's always its biggest strength, and that maybe they do need to work a little bit more on some of those unanswered questions plot-wise, rather than it just being beautiful, but the production is almost perfect.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. The only way to see this film is in 3D, because that's where the effect comes from. And I guess a question I have for you on that is, I'm not talking about the quality of the film, but it does seem like to me this is a movie that's made specifically for the theater and that 3D experience, especially if you're seeing it in an IMAX 3D where it's taking up the entire screen. So you're sitting in the theater with this massive screen and it truly can just immerse you. Do you feel like this is a movie that you would, again, I'm not talking about the quality of the film or whether it's good or anything like that, but do you feel like this is a movie that you would want to watch at home? Or do you feel like this is a movie that's just made for you to maybe go back and see in the theater again? And I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I think that it is primarily made for the theater, which is kind of unfortunate. It's like it's saying two different things at the same time. One, that it's visually beautiful, but also that maybe it was made so grandiose that you feel like it's not as good if you're seeing it at home on a smaller screen that's not 3D.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about this, and I'm just thinking to myself, I really enjoyed watching this film in 3D and the effects and but I'm thinking to myself also, would this movie have the same impact at home without all of that? Mm-hmm. Without being able to feel immersed in the underwater scenes and, I don't know. And I think, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing to be making movies that are meant to be seen on the biggest screen you can possibly see them on and fully immerse you. I mean, that's special. That, there's, yeah.
But also, it's not going to be in theaters forever. That's the thing. It's finite, so it also has to be good at home.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is that I guess I'm struggling with for myself. Like, would I ever want to go back and watch this at home? Because it wouldn't have that aspect. So I don't know. So one last thing before we get to the ratings, which, the music was a big part of the first movie. We had James Horner do the music for that film. Unfortunately, he had passed away, and so there was no way that he could do this film, especially with the 13 years. And so Simon Franklin comes in to do the music here. He had actually worked with Horner and Cameron before. And how did you feel like he did with the music? Did it work for you? Do you feel like it felt like the original film? Was it, better or worse? What'd you think?
I thought it worked with the original music, but it didn't stand out to me. I didn't really have any themes that were super memorable. I'm trying to think, even if I picked up on something that was specifically, like we get used to with Star Wars, there's like Rey's theme, Luke's theme, Leia's theme. Here, I don't feel like there's a differentiation of themes for each character in that sense. But I think that overall it works for the film. It fits. But I wanted a little bit more uniqueness in that sense.
Yeah, I think that the music here is good. I think that it utilizes the theme that Horner had created. There was the moment I felt like Loak is with his Tulkhan, and I felt like there was a scene there where the music was really beautiful. But I think overall, it does a great job of giving you everything it needs to. But I do wish that there had been things that stood out just a little bit more. Like I would have loved to feel like there was even a slightly different sound for the Reef people in a way that kind of stood apart from everything we'd experienced in the forest. I didn't get that, and maybe I would if I probably one of the things, and we've talked about many times already, is that there's so much happening in this film that I think the best part that I could say about the music is it does everything it needs to do for the movie without detracting from anything. and that there's
Right.
so much else to focus on. It is more difficult to focus on that. And it's good that it's not standing out in a bad way. So that's great. Maybe going back to listen to it again or see the movie again, that, you know, it might have a different impact. So yeah, that I just from what we're talking about, though, I almost wish, and I do wish, that there had been something to where when they went to the reef for the first time, I really did feel that difference in sound. I think that would have been really nice. So, Christy, one last question that I do have for you before we get to our ratings, and this is, I didn't put this on the outline, but it was something that I've been thinking about throughout the entire conversation we've had. I've also thought about this after I saw the film. Do you feel like the movie could have been shorter and a little bit tighter in its edit?
Yes. That's the one other thing that I wanted to add that I was going to put in my rating of the movie, is just, it feels in some places like it's long just to say it's over 3 hours long. That he just wants it to feel more epic for being lengthy than anything else, than an actual need to be lengthy. And it's over 3 hours long and still doesn't answer some of those questions that we felt like were more essential to the plot. So I do feel like, for example, some scenes where they're learning how to swim with the reef people were too extended. There could have been more editing done there and cut it down. So yeah, ultimately, I think there were definitely scenes that were extended too far to possibly make it hit this time mark that he wants, rather than by necessity.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's him just wanting it to be 3 hours, but I do feel as though, you know, one of the things that Lucas was very cognizant of when he was doing, especially the Star Wars films, he was very cognizant of the idea of length, and he was very, very harsh in his edit. He was always trying to get the tightest edit possible. And there were even some places where, you know, John Mills and I have talked about this on Aggressive Negotiations, of ideas of where we almost wish he would have added some of those deleted scenes back in, because we feel like they were great choices. But he was just he's a very harsh editor, and he's always, again, he's looking for the tightest, most cohesive edit he can create. And I do think that, in all honesty, I think that this film suffers a little bit from, we can do a thing and therefore we are going to indulge in it a little bit more than needs to be indulged, like the underwater sequences and all of that, which I didn't really have any problem with, in the sense that they were there and I thought that they were beautiful. And again, it's completely immersive in the IMAX 3D. But I think that there could have been choices to which you're more judicious in the edit to allow for, as you mentioned, some of those places to have more answers, more narrative structure, in the sense of answering some of the questions that the movie has raised. And again, being more judicious in the edit that allows for some of those things to happen, instead of maybe sometimes spending time on just the visual beauty. Now, on the opposite side of that, there is also a part of me that realizes that that's one of the things that sets this movie apart, though, in the sense that we are indulging in those things because it sets this movie apart from other films. It is so immersive with the 3D. It is giving you a reason to almost want to come back to the theater, because you want to continue to spend time again, I keep saying it, but I can't think of any other word, immersed in the world. And so it's, you know, I think it would have personally been better to have a little bit tighter edit, one that allowed for some of those questions to be answered that we had. But I can also play devil's advocate and see the reason for the other side. So it's, to me, it's I would say a detriment to the film, but I can also see how it's a positive for the film. So, and for other people, it may be more of a positive, which leads me to a place where I think it's time to rate this, Christy, and I can't wait to see where you are, because I feel like for the most part, we've said mostly good things about this movie, which is very different from our review of the first film. So where do you come down with Avatar, The Way of Water?
So ultimately with this one, I really felt that it felt familiar enough to the first film, but also improved on some issues we had previously where the first one lacked. So I do rate it higher than I did the first film, which is kind of funny because in general, I don't usually like sequels. I'm very particular about that. But this surprised me. And I think they paid some special attention to, again, making it a really beautiful world to look at, really taking the care about how it was filmed, where the technology used, and taking years of extra time to make all of those things right. So I really, I do want to add that I think you have to be careful in general with your timestamp on a movie, because audiences just gut reaction to hearing it's a 3-hour movie are going to go, ooh, that's a real investment. 3 hours is very long. I don't know that I want to sit in the theater that long, but some people do. Some people, it still piques their curiosity. And so we'll see how it goes with the performance overall of the box office here. But I think that overall, I still rate it highly, and I would give it a 4 out of 5 butterfly fish that give you air underwater.
Nice.
Because that was cool. Because there are some really fun things here. And like I said, some areas where they improve on the story, give you more to be interested in. And even though there are some unanswered questions or things that could have been handled better, it still feels more good than bad.
So I came into this movie and started the conversation where we did on purpose because I was very skeptical. I could not have been more skeptical about a movie. I feel like it has been a long time since I've been this skeptical coming into a film. And other than, some of the Marvel movies that we've gone into, the only movie I might have been more skeptical with was The Eternals. And we know how that turned out.
Mm-hmm.
So this movie, though, it very much surprised me, and I heartily agree with everything you said in the way in which I think this movie, I think Cameron did take a lot of the criticisms that he got of the first film, and I think he worked diligently to overcome a lot of them. And I think that the storyline is not going to blow your socks off, right? It's still kind of a basic storyline, but I think it's better here. I think the character work is better here. The character building is better here. There's still some clunky dialogue. That's very much a problem Cameron has. He's not a great dialogue writer. I think in many ways he could be dinged in the same way that a lot of people would ding, George Lucas and disliked his dialogue in the Star Wars films. I think Cameron still has that issue, but I think he definitely went more in depth with the characters. I think he did a great job, especially with Jake Sully, by giving him even more heart here. And like you mentioned when we were talking about the idea of fatherhood, how he took this character to a new place and how he changed who the character was because of him being a father now. So I think all of that is phenomenal and really well done. And the experience of the film in the theater, in 3D, in IMAX, was impressive. And I went to this movie on a Thursday night showing at 7:30, which means the movie didn't actually really start till 8 because of all the previews.
Uh-huh.
It was completely sold out.
Wow.
I've not seen a theater like that. And everybody around me, I'm just hearing oohs and ahs and and like all the things that you want to hear in a theater if you're a filmmaker, of people responding to your movie in the way that you hope that they would. And in all honesty, my wife and I, for Christmas, we're traveling to Dallas, and they've got some great theaters there. I actually kind of want to see this in the movie theater again, because I feel like that's where it's meant to be seen, and I would like to see it on one of the best screens in the country because of that. So I might actually just go to the movie theater again just to see this, and I'm shocked that I'm saying that. So I'm 100% with you. I've give this 4 out of 5 Tulkans. I think I'm impressed, and I can't believe I'm going to say this because I did not think this was going to be possible. I'm looking forward to Avatar 3 to see where they go with this story. And I know that Cameron talked about the idea. He had 5 movies in mind. They have, I think, shot the 3rd one, and they have done it in a way that if this one doesn't do what they need to do box office wise, that they could make that the end. So it would be a trilogy, which is great. So I'm excited. I really am. And I honestly had no idea that was going to be possible. So, you did it, Cameron. You got me. You hooked me. So I'm excited to see what comes next. But Christy, this is our last show of the year. A reminder to everybody, we are going to have our special edition Patreon episode coming out here before the end of the year. So please support us on Patreon so you can get that episode. But this is the last official episode of the 602 Club for 2022. So if people do want to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, especially as we're in the holiday season, where could they find you?
You can find me and all of my Harry Potter, Star Wars content on Instagram and Twitter, of course, at Bespin Bell. Please come talk to me. I'm also in the Babel Conference on Facebook. And when I wasn't here on the 602 Club, I also had a finished show I did with my friends Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells. So you can find that on the Skywalking Through Neverland network. But what about you?
Well, of course, you can find me here on the 602 Club with John Mills, as we also got Assembling Avengers and Snyder Cuts, which, Snyder Cuts is going to be hopping again, as Rebel Moon will be coming out next year from Zack Snyder. And we're continuing our walk through Phase 4 of Assembling Avengers. You can also find me all over social media under the name MattRushing02, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero. Here on the network, doing literary tracks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise, The Artificial Tango about Star Trek Picard, and Saddle Up about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which excited to have Picard and Strange New Worlds back next year. And of course, wrapping up Star Trek Picard as Season 3 is the finale. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network with 2 shows. One is a completed show, talked all about every single chapter of Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time on Owl Post with Drea Kaufman. And then the great John Mills and I talk about Star Wars each and every week on Aggressive Negotiations. But, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?